Anti-communism had been such a part of him. He said, sure, I'll come. So he took the train ride from Stamford, Connecticut, down here. It's about 8 hours on a train, you know, bump, bump, bump. Came, had a wonderful time, I'm happy to say. We gave him several glasses of wine, which got him in a good mood. Friends of his were there. And he got up and talked, not too long, maybe 5 or 10 minutes, about a film he'd just seen, The Lives of Others. The Lives of Others. It's about a Stasi, East German secret agent, who had begun covering up for this young couple, artistic couple in East Germany. He said, it's a great film, you've got to see it. So there we were, dedicating the Victims of Communism Memorial, and there he was talking about this great anti-communist film. And I do believe that was his last public appearance, although he kept writing, found time in these last 6, 7, 8 months of his life to finish up a memoir about Ronald Reagan, the Reagan I knew, and to see published another memoir about Barry Goldwater. The man loved to write. That really was his life in so many ways. I wasn't sure there was a question there, was there? Yes, ma'am.
How do you think he would have felt about the new statue of Stalin being brought to Virginia in Bedford as a World War II memorial? What would he have said?
I don't know whether you heard that, what he said about this Stalin statue down in Bedford. Well, maybe he would have said something like, let's see, this is a memorial to D-Day, and so they've got a bust of Stalin. Does that mean that at the World War II memorial, they're going to have a bust of Mao Zedong because he fought the Japanese during the Second World War? Yeah, it's just so absurd. So he would be much wittier than I would be, and can be, about that, and would say, no, history cannot be forgotten, it cannot be neglected, it cannot be overlooked. Let's set the record straight about what Stalin did. And Stalin had nothing to do with D-Day, the famous storming of the beaches at Normandy. Nothing. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have a particularly good story about the first time you met him, or another favorite anecdote?
Well, since my wife is not here, I'm going to tell a story about her and Bill Buckley. You're not going to tell her that I told this story, right? Okay, make that promise. My wife was, this is before we were married, she was up in New York City as a young Republican. Had some connection with YAF, but the Young Republicans was really her thing. And she had written an editorial about how the Republican Party had to be more conservative. This is for a newsletter of the Young Women's Republican Club of New York. And a few days after this editorial appeared, the phone rang in her small little apartment which she shared with other girls in Manhattan, New York City. And his voice said, Miss Stevens? Yes. This is Bill Buckley. Oh, Bob, stop fooling around. I know it isn't really Bill Buckley. And hung up. Sat down, began reading or whatever she's doing. Phone rings. Yes. Miss Stevens, this really is Bill Buckley. And of course she almost collapsed. Oh, it really, And he said, I read your editorial in the newsletter and it's marvelous. Would you please come to the next editorial board meeting of National Review? which he did, which is another story. But it's so typical of Bill Buckley to reach out, seeing a young person's output, you know, an editorial in a newsletter, and being caught by it and being willing to personally pick up the phone and make that call. No secretary made that call. He made the call. It was at night. In the evening. Maybe he had several glasses of wine. I don't know. But it was so typical to so single out and to see something in that, and he wanted to encourage that young person. Didn't know who Ann Stevens was. That was very typical of Bill, of his generous heart and spirit. Yeah, in the back.
First of all, I really enjoyed reading the book. It was fantastic.
Thank you. Authors love to hear that always. Lay it on.
I particularly enjoyed how you had human, the third dimension to Bill Buckley, not just from his own personal writings, but also even one story we talked about him protesting at Yale with his brothers and sisters.
Oh yeah.
And they dressed up as lefties and went undercover. I thought that was fantastic, and it sort of added a new dimension to who he was. One of the things I thought was that his driving force was anti-communism, and that drove the idea of fusionism and the necessary greater evil. And towards the end of the book, you sort of discuss his internal war about the war in Iraq, and also Islamofascism or Islamo-extremism.
Right.
And I was curious how he would feel. Having anti-communism was a great way for everybody to put aside certain differences,
Right.
to come together, and then the new right's born, and now this is possibly a new, threat towards the Western civilization.
Right.
But you discuss his internal fight with the war, but how about the idea of, standing up against Islamo-extremism?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Could you go into...
like all of us, and we should remember that whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, whether you were a liberal or a conservative, most Americans, and it was debated in extensio in Congress, agreed that we should do something about Saddam Hussein, because this was somebody who used weapons of mass destruction in the past, and if there was any possibility of there being those kinds of weapons at his command, that spelled, danger, not just for the people there, but beyond that, perhaps even our own national security interests. And the famous speech by Colin Powell in the United Nations and some other things as well. So there was a consensus. And Bill was a part of that consensus, said we should go after Saddam Hussein. What happened, though, as the war, not so much the war, but as the aftermath continued, and the goal became nation building, then Bill Buckley said, wait, I'm not for that. Nation building, trying to bring about a democracy in the Middle East, in that particular country at this particular time, is not conservative. It just isn't. That's not to say that Bill Buckley would not, I think would, and did, support forceful action against enemies, proven enemies, demonstrated enemies, did not back away from that. But if you start getting into more utopian goals, which he called nation building in Iraq, then he would not support that. And that, notwithstanding the fact that George W. Bush was a Yaley, another Yaley, and that there may have been some personal connections there. That was something he couldn't go along with.
Just a follow-up, one more question, if it's all right?
Yeah.
At the end of the book, he said that he gave his shares away to National Review.
Yeah.
To us, his son Chris and a few other folks
Mm-hmm.
that he had trusted, and one person was a young man.
Yeah.
And I apologize if I don't have the name off the top of my head. Do you know more about that relationship or why he chose to give another young writer, and in particular him?
Well, that particular writer had written for National Review, and he did a brilliant job, and he caught Bill's eye and he helped him in research on at least one of his books. So he got to know him and felt that here again was the future. What Bill Buckley was trying to do, something I tried to point out, to create this not only magazine, but to create a movement. And that you had to have a basic platform on which you could debate and discuss ideas for that movement. That was National Review. So he was looking always to extend its life as much as he possibly could. That's the reason why he picked Rich Lowry, who was only 30 when he became the editor of National Review. This young writer you're talking about was in his 20s. I think he's 22 or 23. So he was very much aware of trying to think ahead, trying to build for the future, trying to encourage young people to the greatest extent possible to realize just what they were, hopefully within a conservative context. Yes, young lady here.
You said along those lines, you said that he would always, encourage and saw that we should give young people great responsibility.
Right.
And then mentor them. Today, like always, it's hard for young people to be really taken seriously. What role or responsibility do you see young people having in the modern conservative movement, and what advice do you think you would give to young people today?
Well, there's so much to be done. Where does one begin? I would encourage young people to go into academia, to get advanced degrees, think about teaching, because the professors, the liberal professors of the 1960s are dying, or dead, or gone. And there are openings now in colleges and universities across the country for young professors. So I think that's one redoubt which we have to take, and we haven't taken it yet. But I think we can have a lot more impact in that area. The other thing that I would say, quoting Horace Greeley, I'd say go west. Don't spend your entire life here in Washington, D.C., as I did. That was my particular, that's what God intended for me to do, obviously, because here I am. I was born here. Go west, and what I say by that, I mean, think in terms of television, films, production, documentaries, feature films, things of that nature. It's an area that conservatives have done very little in. And I think, again, there's an opportunity for them. I have friends out there in Hollywood, and they tell me that there is a conservative underground, a rather large conservative underground in Hollywood. So you could be a director, you could be a producer, you could be an actor, you could be in production, technical production, all kinds of things, sound, cinematography. So I think that's a tremendous opportunity. And then finally, after you've made your $1 million or more, then you can run for office. Yes, Asa.
So I'm very happy to listen to you. I regard myself as a conservative, and I gave 20 years of free time as a volunteer to Paul Barrick and worked for him for just about 20 or 21 years until he died. But I have also a question. I regard also Pat Buchanan, with whom I seem to agree on many issues. I used to read his editorial. What is your opinion? Where shall we put you on the conservatives?
Well, Pat Buchanan is a conservative. There's no question about it. He is not somebody who should be excluded. He is still one of the best polemicists that we have. But you have to pick and choose, because I think he is not the same kind of conservative that he was when I first met him, 30 or 40 years ago. I think he's become, maybe a little, I would say, unrealistic about where we are today. I mean, it just seems like, Pat, globalization is here. We've got to begin to adjust to it. And so setting up protectionist barriers and tariffs and all of that is just not possible. Not to say that we should ignore the plight of the American working man. I'm not saying that, but it seems to me that Pat is taking a very, uncompromising position on that. I think also that I don't agree with him on his stand on Israel. I think that Israel is still our best and most reliable ally and partner in the Middle East. And I think that we should do whatever we possibly can to support it, encourage it. Because I think that's not only in their interest, but I think it's in our interest. That we need that foothold there, that democratic foothold. And by the way, for those of you who are libertarians, if you studied the economy of Israel lately, they used to be socialists, out and out. But they have moved increasingly towards a free enterprise model there. And we should encourage them in that as well.
Lee, would you
Yes.
relay that wonderful exchange between Ayn Rand and Bill Buckley?
Yeah, I should try to figure out. Give me a minute here. Go talk among yourselves for a minute here. Well, if I can find that thing there.
Mr. Edwards' books, by the way, are available at a very deep discount of $20, and he will most graciously sign them out. Also, next week, we are having another author's night back at Armand's, 6 to 8 p.m., featuring the two Kens, Buckley and Buckley, authors of The Blueprint, Obama's Plan to Subvert the Constitution and Build an Imperial Presidency.
Buckley meets Rand. Bill Buckley meets Ayn Rand. First time. Probably 55, 56, something like that. Pre-Atlas Shrugged. And her first words to him, heavily accented by her native Russian tongue, were, "You are too intelligent to believe in God. You are too intelligent to believe in God." That's G-O-T-T, or as we know better, G-O-D. So for the next 2 or 3 years, Buckley sent Miss Rand, who was Russian-born, postcards in liturgical Latin. But as Bill said, levity with Miss Rand was not an effective weapon. Stronger measures were called for. He called in Whittaker Chambers, who indeed was a stronger measure. He was a battleship, an aircraft carrier, to take care of her. Well, we were at 23:30, I see, with a time clock up here. I'd be happy to sign books as long as my arm does not fall off. And I thank you all very much.